Dunia pasca pandemik COVID-19, kita menyaksikan cabaran yang besar di setiap negara, tidak kira benua yang mereka hadapi pada ketika ini untuk memulihkan ekonomi mereka. Dan apabila kita berdepan juga dengan perubahan teknologi khususnya dalam aspek artificial intelligence ataupun kecerdasan buatan ini dan juga data analytics sendiri, bagaimana untuk kita melihat kedua-dua aspek ini diasimilasikan dalam pelan pembangunan negara bergerak kepada pemulihan ekonomi pasca pandemik tersebut, dan juga reality check yang kita belajar ketika pandemik dan disatukan dalam perancangan sesebuah negara. Itu yang kita ingin saksikan khususnya dalam konteks Malaysia sendiri. Bagaimanakah perkara ini akan diangkat dalam bentuk dasar maupun pelan hala tuju dan juga blueprint yang kita gariskan di peringkat serantau dan juga di peringkat antarabangsa dan juga di peringkat tempatan. Itu yang paling penting, itu yang kita ingin bincangkan dalam episod pada kali ini. Saya bersama dengan Matt Fitzpatrick, iaitu Senior Partner and Global Leader of QuantumBlack Labs, McKinsey & Company. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Let's talk about the intersection of technology and sustainable growth. How data analytics and also artificial intelligence play its role in supporting the sustainable growth, especially in healthcare, agriculture, financial, and also urban planning in that sense?
Yeah, well, look, I think sustainable, inclusive growth are three things I think go together very well. And if I look at the impact of AI, I'll just name a couple examples. But if you look at healthcare and the ability to have better patient compliance, better patient interventions, better management of risk groups, all of that has been enabled by AI. If you look at agriculture, maybe more than any other sector, if you think about crop yields, crop planning, weather forecasting, I mean, all of that, which has enabled many of the advances in lifespan and population growth, has all been enabled by AI in many ways. And so I think there's a lot of different sectors where maybe not generative AI, but core machine learning has become crucial to the advancement of kind of many of our most crucial societies. I think generative AI will play a bigger role in some other sectors like customer service, customer interactions. But I think it's the combined framework of AI, which is both ML and generative AI, that's powering kind of sustainable inclusive growth.
But how do we, in terms of data privacy and also security, how do we address some of the challenges such as the privacy of data and also data security and ethical considerations surrounding the collection of and use of the data?
Yeah, well, so even I think before the advent of Gen AI a year ago, data privacy and security has been a huge focus for a long time, whether that's some of the regulations in Europe that have kind of governed data privacy, which I think are all really good, as well as PII data, for example. Any personal information is hugely protected in almost every company that does use it in some form. So I think the data infrastructure that powers a lot of this has always been very focused on security and privacy. I think generative AI is a bit of a different kind of step forward in that I think what people are doing now is they're starting to bring in new sets of data like textual data that relates to, let's say, human interactions at call centers, things like that. And so that means usually the way that people are operationalizing generative AI is in a separate, what we call Gen AI lake, rather than in their core data infrastructure. And they're doing that very intentionally for data privacy and security, which is, if I've got a bunch of very private information on my healthcare company, like patient data, et cetera, I don't necessarily move all of that into my Gen AI lake because it's more experimental. I'm figuring out exactly what the use cases will be. And so for now, at least, most people have a separate environment where they're using generative AI.
I want to talk about the digital divide and gaps as well, the unequal access to technology and data pose challenges in achieving equitable and also inclusive for sustainable growth itself. How do you see this area, especially in this region?
Okay, so I would not have the best perspective on the nuances of this region. I would say that the unequal access to technology, that is a complicated question. So if you look at ways that technology has enhanced access, like I'll take credit underwriting for mortgages in the US, right? Like even populations that don't necessarily have access to technology do get a lot of benefits around preventing redlining, more equal underwriting, et cetera. So they may not be the ones with hands-on keys for all of it, but they are actually benefiting from technology in a lot of ways. I do think one of the big benefits of ChatGPT, for example, is taking the full corpus of knowledge that exists across the globe and making it very easy for anyone to access with a few keystrokes. I think that provides more access to technology in a lot of ways. So I think it's democratizing access to the corpus of information that's been very hard to sift through in the past. I mean, if you wanted to go study Russian literature 3 years ago and you did not have library access, that was a much harder thing to do than asking now for a summary of Tolstoy on generative AI algorithm.
But how do you foresee the a complexity of integrating diverse data sets and also ensuring data quality and accuracy, and also addressing algorithm biases in that sense?
Yeah, so let me separate out those things in a couple different ways. I think all third-party readily available data is going to become, everyone is going to have access to that. So by definition, Cohere, OpenAI, the big large language models are using all publicly available data. So the question for most companies starts to be, what's the particular data that I have that I can use, that I can train my models on, whether that's my customer service interactions, whether that's repositories of code I want to migrate. And what I would note on most of the generative AI use cases I've seen, at least, are on what I would say is a less sensitive corpus of data than traditional ML. So like traditional ML is going to run off of PII patient data, or it's going to run off of customer data sets that have all sorts of socioeconomic information. Generative AI use cases are mostly interaction data, like broad strokes here, interaction data, code, and then kind of expert content and content you're trying to summarize. It tends to be, I would say, on balance, a less sensitive corpus of data than traditional ML.
But do you think the policy side, especially from the government side, do they understand the whole situation better in terms of supporting the whole ecosystem for AI globally?
No, it's a great question. Look, I think regulation regulation in ML is fairly active already. So if you think about healthcare for things like value-based care or credit underwriting as a bank, I think most governments have figured out how to regulate ML, because in machine learning, it's very easy to understand what the outcome you're deciding is, let's say a credit decision, and then the 10 variables that decided that credit decision. That's a very transparent thing. And so it's very easy for a regulator to say, okay, I want to see all your ML models, I want to see your outcomes, and I want to understand if any of those are biased, and I want to see the set of inputs that determine those outcomes. So ML is a very regulated thing, or regulatable thing. Generative AI is more complicated because a lot of the regulatory themes are not really, we are still figuring out what those are, right? I won't say everyone has a great answer, but I'll give you two. Photographs. So what is a libel if I create a photograph of you doing something bad, which is now possible? There's no corpus of law that says how to regulate that now. Like, what is truth in a photograph? And that's, I think, one that is going to have happen, because every major public figure is going to have photos generated of them doing the things that are probably not true. And so I think regulators will start to, my guess is that will start to be regulated via, like, you'll have to have acknowledgments on whether it's a doctored photo or a taken photo. I think you will have regulation and tools around that. I think the other really complicated one is IP. And that's probably going to be the biggest question with generative AI, is how do you regulate similar but original content? So like, write me a poem that sounds like Shakespeare, or produce a song that sounds like Taylor Swift singing it. Like, is something similar to somebody's voice but not actually their voice? How do you protect that? And I think copyright law is going to evolve a lot, but I think that's a good thing. I think having governance for that will be a positive thing.
Where are we in terms of regulation right now? I mean, if you look at US, this debate is happening.
Yeah.
Where are we?
I think we're still early. I mean, really, foundation models have been around since about 2017. But I would say really nobody paid attention to them until last year when OpenAI started. And so this has been a very active debate in the last year. But like all things, it takes regulators a little while to figure out how to enforce this. I think you're seeing lawsuits already that will start to form some of that around, you cannot steal my voice, or this sounds too much like me as a writer. I think the writer's strike in Hollywood is another big example of that. So one thing I think is a positive is that the hype curve around this has brought enough attention to it that I think you'll have some resulting regulation from.
Let's talk about the QuantumBlack. How does QuantumBlack ensure that your technological advancements contribute positively to the various sectors, especially communities for holistic development and also sustainable development as a whole?
Yeah, so some of that is just a conscious choice to make sure that we work in sectors where we think we move society forward in a positive way. So sustainable development, things like carbon footprint modeling and understanding like the carbon footprint of real estate, which is actually quite a hard thing to set a baseline for without data and technology. Or, value-based care and healthcare is another one we spend a ton of time on. I think there's numerous different sectors like that we've made a conscious effort to spend time on, and sustainable inclusive growth has been a real focus of many of the things we've done. I think then there's a second part of it, which is in the models we build, we try to make sure that transparency, that they bring transparency and positive outcomes to the market they're in. So an example being loan underwriting, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you think about any bank in the U.S. now doing loan underwriting, what you want to make sure is that there's no what's called redlining. There's no bias in how you decide to extend credit. Do you not, extend it in a biased way towards certain communities versus others? But ML is actually a very transparent way to do that. I think that's the really positive thing about like in a world 10 years ago where you made an underwriting decision based only on like two factors, it was a bit murky why you made that decision. But when you have like a clear view of 25 factors in an applicant and you compare that to all other applicants, you can establish things like bias very cleanly. And so we spend a lot of time making sure that everything that we help build is transparent and really reflects the value system we want to help build.
How's in terms of adoption by the corporate sector? I mean, it differs depending on the countries and also advanced technologies within the countries itself. But if you could share with us within this region, for instance, or as you could, the things that we can learn from other regions as well, in terms of adoption from the private sector as well, in terms of AI.
Yeah. So if I take the different components of AI, it's uneven is the short answer. So I think ML is very mature in some industries like financial services. Obviously, has been a big. Healthcare has been a big proponent of it. Yeah. There are other areas like industrial machinery where it's more nascent. Mm-hmm. I think similarly with Gen AI, there are certain areas like media that are going to take very active advantage of it pretty soon. Software and engineering development is another big one. There are other industries where I think they'll be slower to embrace it, but also it's unclear the relevance to it. Like metals and mining, I'm not sure Gen AI will be. I think ML is very interesting for metals and mining, but I don't think Gen AI really has figured out its applicability for that yet.
Yeah. I mean, I want to ask the questions that, probably you heard this question a lot. Will AI replace the existing jobs that we have?
I was on a panel earlier, and somebody right before me on the economic development panel was pointing out that, and this is not my stat, but I thought it was interesting. She said that in a schoolroom today, 60% of the jobs that people have will be for industries or jobs that do not exist yet. Mm. So if you think about the constant turnover of all industries, you have so many new things, solar panels, that were not even really popular 20 years ago. And I think AI will follow a similar curve. I think there will be tons of new jobs created by a lot of these technologies, and there'll be some jobs that become less prevalent. But that's been true of every single period in the last 50 years as new jobs are formed and other jobs become less important.
I want to get your point of view with the rapid changing of technology and technological advancements for countries such as Malaysia. There's a lot of challenges that we may face, but how do we navigate these challenges moving forward and fostering innovation and also development at the same time?
So let me think of what those challenges might be. Obviously, how you regulate and deal with them is one part of them. How you take advantage of them to foster innovation and growth is a different part of them. I think a lot of the usage of these will be kind of twofold. Bigger companies deciding how to enhance their businesses around them, governments as well. But then a lot of small entrepreneurial companies thinking how to build new things. And the observation I have, if you think about small businesses, et cetera, is they're going to be some of the most active users of a lot of this new technology. And I think many new things will come to pass because of it. So I think we're in what I would call a transitional period where we're a year into this. No one's quite figured out, who the new emergents are going to be. And I think Malaysia will have its own set of those. I think at the same time, you want to make sure that you do think about regulation that makes sure nothing bad happens from it. So I think you basically want to let the private sector have all the new developments that will come from it, and also think about, regulators will think about the right way to regulate that as we go.
How do you assess the current global status of technological integration in sustainable development globally, and if you could comment also in this region as well?
Yeah, so I have less of a view. I'm only here for 2 days at the moment, so I have less of a view on this region. But I will say, I think if you look globally on I'll name a couple examples, but agriculture, the steps forward in terms of crop outputs and lifespan as a result of that have been massive, and much of that is driven by analytics and technology and in kind of crop forecasting and yields and all that. So I think that's been a huge one. I think healthcare, there's no doubt if you look at, look at the vaccine development work in the last 2 years with gene editing, gene sequencing. Many of these technologies have been a huge part of the benefits and advancements for kind of humanity over the last 10 to 15 years. So there are definitely challenges, and there's always pluses and minuses to everything. But I think on balance, I think the next one obviously was sustainability and the implications of kind of carbon footprints, both operational and construction-based carbon. I think that's going to be the next horizon that humanity will wrestle with. But I think you're not going to be able to make intelligent decisions around that until you understand the data baseline and where things are being built and what the implications of those are. And I think that's where analytics will come to play, like just understanding the baseline.
But how do you see the argument of that AI would create more, whether it will create more inclusivity or making the gap even wider globally?
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to look at that question, which is there are new businesses that have arisen that have created wealth, which has created some disparity. But on the flip side, if you look at the users of technology, I think it's definitely been more inclusive, whether that's being able to call a cab or an Uber anywhere you want, or making sure that loan access is much more democratized, which is a whole suite of players in the US doing that, or even things like healthcare providers making sure they can ensure more consistent standards of care and all the processes and checks. That was it was very hard to measure kind of consistent care access without kind of a technological backbone. And so I think, look, technology has its pluses and minuses. I won't say it's all good, but I think on balance, if you look at standards of living and economic production and kind of many of the huge steps forward society has made over the last 20 years, I think technology has driven a lot of that. I think there's obviously the social media part of that, but that's not necessarily analytically related. I think that has its own challenges.
Let's talk about the good side, because in Malaysia and in this region particularly, we talk a lot about food security. And one of the things that we can do is via AI and also data analytics is for agriculture is to enhance the crop production and minimize water usage, etc. But how do you foresee this technology being used, should be used in this region, further to solve this problem, especially when it comes to food security?
Well, look, I think that's a great example of one of the real positive. You think about at scale quality control and at kind of ensuring things are consistent, high quality, and scalable is a really powerful thing for agriculture as a whole. And I think if you think about everything from like the FDA regulating to make sure that all produced drugs are high quality, like spot testing, security testing, that's a lot of what technology has brought in as a backbone that's allowed people to live longer, be healthier. Agriculture's been, if you look at lifespan increases, probably the biggest driver of all of that over the last 20 years. And the example I gave in the talk earlier is, I don't remember the exact percentage, but some huge percentage of the world 80 years ago was engaged as agriculture, or maybe 100 years ago, was engaged as agriculture as their primary profession. Now that's a smaller percentage now, but that labor all went to hugely different industries and created a lot of new things. And the advances from manual to automated that happen in agriculture have been a huge part of expanding human lifespans on average from that period by decades. So I think that's a really good example of a win-win from that.
Last but not least, based on the current situation of AI and data analytics and whole technological advancements currently, but how do you foresee 10 years down the road in terms of adoption and technological advancements worldwide? And how should we brace, for impact?
Well, first of all, one thing, I think it's going to take longer for AI and Gen AI to be adopted than people think. I've spent the last 10 years helping people build ML models, and I would say it's pretty shocking how few organizations are still using them at scale. And there's a whole host of different reasons for that. If you look at like how foundation models for Gen AI are implemented, they're pretty hard. They're not easy to implement for starters. Like they do what's called hallucinations, which is they produce unpredictable outcomes that you might not want, and you have to basically make sure that you regulate and protect against all of those. So I think it's going to take people a bit of time to figure out how to implement these things at scale and really use them. And I think if even take a step further, like I think people take time to feel comfortable that Gen AI is not good for decisioning. Like traditional ML is much better for decision-based outputs like a pricing decision, for example, because it's audible, it's really clear what went into it, went out, what came out of it, and you know exactly what you're trying to predict. Gen AI is effectively allowing an algorithm with a neural network, deep kind of black box model to come to an outcome that should be good most of the time, but is not always good. And that is a real risk. I think that's the challenge with these language models is they produce a really good outcome 80% of the time, and you have to figure out how to put guardrails around that other 20% so your outcome's consistently good. And that's not an easy thing to do. So I think you'll see a wave of chatbots that'll probably be the next version of this, but I think it's going to take a couple of years for this to see widespread adoption.
But we're on the right track for this region especially.
I think so, based on the set of conversations I've had over the last 2 days. I think people are really interested in it. I think there's a lot of really entrepreneurial projects that people are building up. And, some of the advantage you guys have is it seems like, at least based on my conversations, a lot of the data infrastructures that have been built out here are modern. They've been built out in the last couple of years. They're not built on 15 or 30-year-old mainframe servers like a lot of stuff in the US. And so you have a really modern foundation to build off and use this technology. So I think that's pretty exciting.
All right. Matt, thanks so much for joining us. It's a pleasure having you on our show. That is Matt Fitzpatrick, Senior Partner and Global Leader of QuantumBlack Labs McKinsey & Company. Sekian saja untuk episod pada kali ini. Saya Najib Arif. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.